Brutus and I walked the quiet streets of Pompeii doing what we did best, looking to make a memory. But little did we know, the memory would make itself. There had been strange occurrences in Pompeii as earthquakes shook the city and ash rained from the heavens. But many of us Pompeians paid no mind to it, as we all survived a large earthquake some years ago. As Brutus and I walked on the stay-by street towards the Forum, Brutus shouted, "Look, there's Hera." Brutus had an admiration for our friend, Hera unmatched by any other man. As Brutus rushed to praise his goddess, a tremor shook, which rendered him off balance and left him in the ground dirty and embarrassed. With his face as red as wine, Brutus cursed at the ground, making a scene on this peaceful morning. As a crowd gathered, and Brutus continued his rant, he noticed Hera enjoying the spectacle, giggling and smiling. Dumbfounded, Brutus finally finished his walk to greet Hera, and gave her a massive grin. As the two spoke, I gave them their distance, hoping that my friend could make up for his little tantrum. As I stood quietly, I noticed a strange dark cloud coming from the top of Mount Vesuvius. As I pondered at the remarkable sight, Hera called my name. "MARO, come, we're going to the Forum." Happily, I joined Hera and her faithful follower and put the thought of the strange cloud in the back of my mind. As we walked to the Forum, I noticed Brutus's eyes wander, searching for a gift that is worthy for Hera. Smiling, I whisper, "Brutus, do you even have enough money to buy her a loaf of bread?" Irritated, Brutus quickly replied, "Do you even have enough, shut up." I laughed hysterically at the idiotic response until Brutus punched me in the shoulder and gave me a funny look. As the two of us butted heads for a few moments, Hera ran off towards the side street by the Temple of the Emperors. As we followed, she paused and stood still, silent. Her face was emotionless and pale. I grabbed her on the shoulder, and all of a sudden she became reanimated. She looked at me, and then at Brutus, and then right back to me. "Do you see that cloud?" We stare at the mountain and the spectacle that is occurring above. "We need to leave." Right then and there, a noise filled my eardrums, followed by the sight of an explosion, and the dark cloud crept towards the city. "Follow me," I shouted as I led my friends towards the harbor. As we sprinted by the meeting hall, rocks the size of boulders started hitting the street. I grabbed Hera's wrist and rushed into the polling station building to my left. Brutus followed closely and fell as a small rock pierced his left leg. I turned back and pulled my companion onto my shoulder and fell into the structure, closing the door behind. Panicked, scared, and uncertain, we hid in the back storage room of the polling station, with the door shut tightly. Brutus's leg gushed blood as I tied a cloth to stop the profuse bleeding. He acted like he wasn't in pain, but I knew he needed medical attention as soon as possible. As debris and rocks continued to puncture the roof above, we huddled and prayed to the gods for protection. After hiding for some time, we tried to open the door to check if it was safe to go back out on the street. As we pushed the door, it wouldn't budge. It was as if it was bolted shut. We were like mice in a trap, awaiting the inevitable outcome of death. I sat back and zoned out as Brutus started to go into a frenzy, hitting and shouting at the door. I looked up at Hera. Her face was white as a ghost. She trembled and whimpered, frightened for her life. I kept imagining of what she might have been thinking of, whether it be her family, her friends, or maybe she was wondering about something completely different. Whatever it was, it didn't last long. As the color in her face returned, she shouted, "Look!" As she pointed up at the ceiling. A hole just about big enough for a person to fit through was made from the falling rock and debris. I jumped out of my seated position and exclaimed, "Here, I'll lift you two up, and after that you can go get help and come save me." Stubbornly denying my request, Brutus said, "No, I'm the strongest, and not to forget, my leg will slow whoever I'm with down. You two can get out, and after that you can come help me." It was obvious he was still trying to impress Hera, even in this life or death situation. I knew arguing would be futile, as Brutus was the most stubborn person that I had ever met. I looked at him and opened my mouth to try to counter his decision, but before I could even speak a word, he was already saying goodbye to Hera, kissing her lips for the first and last time. He then started lifting Hera up towards the ceiling. Tears dropped down towards us as she pulled herself onto the roof. I looked at Brutus and hugged him tightly. He whispered into my ear, "Get her out of the city." I looked at him closely. "No matter what, make sure she lives," he said. I looked at his eyes, pulsating with passion. He had realized that one of us would have to sacrifice themselves right here to save the others. As he lifted me up and shouted, "Look after her while I'm gone now, you hear?" I looked one last glance at Brutus, then pulled myself onto the roof. Filled with emotion, I started to think of ways to get Brutus out. Yet no rope or ladder or anything of use were in sight. The form, engulfed with flames and debris, was useless. Everything was destroyed. In a matter of minutes, after standing on the roof, it started to crumble from beneath our feet. "We need to find a way down," Hera exclaimed, putting my will to save Brutus behind me. I focused on his request to protect Hera. Daringly, I jumped down to the side of the polling station, and fortunately, I landed with no injury. I then found a large wooden board, which had fallen from the building, and held it above my head and propped it into a position so that Hera could use it as a step for a descent from the roof. As she stepped on the board, I held her body weight above me and carefully reunited her with the ground. Turning my attention back towards Brutus, I evaluated the front of the building. I realized that getting Brutus out of the rubble was hopeless, as layer among layer of stone and wood collapsed around the storage room. All of the front wall had collapsed. The building was falling in on itself, leaving Brutus surrounded. My eyes teared up as I knew that I would never see my friend again. After a few moments, and my last tear fell, I quickly came back to reality, and again felt the violent earthquakes moving the ground, and saw the bright red rocks that were falling from the sky. I looked at Hera. My heart sunk as she was in agony, staring into the rubble. I hugged her and said, "We can't help him now. I know it's hard, but we have to go." Hera, hesitant to speak, looked down at the ground as if visualizing Brutus's face one last time, then back towards me. We started walking through the forum again towards the original destination, the harbor. While walking, we saw bloody Pompeians dead on the streets, and the forum, engulfed in flames, was obliterated to the point that it was impossible to recognize. As we approached the temple of Apollo, rocks began to fall violently once more. We entered the temple for shelter. We walked to the feet of the statue of Apollo, and I stood still and thought to myself, all the ships must have left by now. How can we escape this hell? Something inside me told me that the worst had yet to come, and that we're running out of time to avoid it. Hera was on her knees praying to Apollo, asking for the sun to return and the storm to fade. Staring at the pleading girl, I thought of my sister pleading for an item in the market. I thought of my mother laughing at my sister's enthusiasm. I thought of my dad eventually buying the item and my sister's gratitude while I complained about her being spoiled. In that moment, I smiled. I was content all my life. I thought, if the gods brought me here to realize that it's my time for my life to end, so be it. But I had one last duty, an oath to an old friend. I had to save Hera. I told Hera, "Come on, maybe there's still a ship in the harbor, let's go." She got up, and we sprinted towards the harbor. Rocks fell above us as we made it to the docks. It was deserted, not one ship further than a couple miles offshore. As an explosion sent my ears ringing, I looked up at Mount Vesuvius and saw a cloud, dark as the night, growing larger and larger, coming right at us. Cloud swallowed Pompeii. I failed Brutus. All we could do was wait, as Hera and I held one another close. All I could say was, I'm sorry.